This is our 13th edition, and we thank you for coming and joining us. And I just have to say, everybody sitting in the back of the room, it looks like church, right? Grab the pew in the back. Our subject tonight is early Meadows Valley, and tonight's panelists are Inez Wilson Morris, Glen Carlock, Ken Johnson, and Dorothy Whitney Nadeau. And our moderator is historian Dale Fisk from Council. Please welcome them.
Well, I always like to start off by asking each panelist to kind of introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their background. And I think a couple of you guys have been on the panel before, haven't you? And so Inez, let's start with you. What's your history in the valley?
Well, I arrived in the valley 70 years ago in September. It was quite a shock to come into a valley with mountains because I came from the Big Sky Country, Montana. And I kept telling my husband I couldn't breathe. The mountains were closing in. I do remember we moved into a very rundown little house, and I was met with no electricity, no phones, an outside toilet, and an old car, but a horse. And that's about all. If you want to, time goes on. I've seen some good changes, and I've seen some that aren't so accepted in our valley. So that would be it.
So that was in the 1930s?
1936.
36. And how old were you at the time?
Pardon?
How old were you at the time?
Well, you can ask a woman my age, but don't ever ask a younger woman.
I'm not asking you how...
92 next month.
92.
And my daughter says I can't see too well or hear too well. And I tell her I've heard enough and seen enough my lifetime. I didn't need anymore.
Well, Glen, what's your background?
Well, I was born here at the south end, far out as you can get out there, in 1929. And darn if I'm not still here. That's about the size of it.
Yeah. Who were your parents, and what was their kind of story of?
Well, Dad, it was Dan Carlock, and Mom, her name was Ophelia Hathaway, and they got married in Parma, and then they had 2 children, and then they came up here, and that's where they settled. And
did they have more kids up here? Or?
A whole bunch of us.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's a little bit about? So you went through school here. And,
Here, yeah.
Yeah. What's been your career in the area?
Nothing.
Been retired all your life.
There you are. Been retired all my life. Worked at the mill, for instance, and worked on the highway department, and just various jobs around here, even for the county work, and to do anything else. Well, used to janitor's school, didn't it? Yeah, high school. Anyway, nothing big. Or I'd be rich.
Okay, Ken, what's your story?
Well, I was born in Weiser, Idaho, and moved here. Well, I couldn't stand the water, so I think about a year after I was born, and that was in 1930. And Kenneth Johnson and R.B. Johnson were my parents, and I'm Kenneth Leroy. Most of the people around here know me by Leroy.
We went to school together.
We did. With him, too. And after I graduated, I went to the Navy. And after the Navy, I lived in Payette for a while, and then went on an aerospace tour for about 35 years. And now I'm living back in Post Falls, Idaho. And I came down to do the history on the Johnson family, and I don't think there are many around that remember the Reed family very well. They had a pretty short tour here, except for my grandmother that came back to live and died here.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Reeds. Give us some background on who they
Well, the
were. and
Reeds
what-
were originally from the Washington, Asotin area, Clarkston area, and Lewiston, Idaho. My granddad, Reed, was born in Lewiston. My grandmother, Shirley, was born in Asotin. They got married in Clarkston.
And what was his name?
His name was Simmy, S-I-M-M-I-E. I always thought it was Simeon, but I guess every paper I see it's Simmy. So I don't know
That
whether
wasn't a
that's...
short for anything, or that was his whole name?
Well, I thought Simeon was probably it, but even on their marriage certificate and on his diploma, it's S-I-M-M-I-E, Simmy.
What's-
They call him Sim.
Do you know where that name came from?
No, I don't.
That's interesting. Has a unique
Yeah,
name.
it's a unique name. And his forefathers were from the Kentucky and back to Virginia. They came over into Virginia from Wales and Irish, Scotland, English.
So was it Semi that came here first, as far as the first
Sort of
generation?
New Meadows?
Yeah.
Yes, they were married, and after they were married, they moved to Weiser area and homesteaded in Weiser for a while. Then Granddad Reed and Grandma Reed, and my mother at that time was about 17, and her brother was probably 20, 19 or 20, Ted Reed. They moved to New Meadows, and he went to work, Sim went to work for my granddad Johnson in the blacksmith shop.
Do you know about what time period that would have been?
That would have been about 1927.
Yeah.
Then he decided to go out and trap in the Chamberlain Basin for a season, and they sent my mother to Clarkston to school, and I think that's because she met my dad here. Kind of wanted to separate the two. They were both in high school. But Dad graduated and went to a business school in Clarkston, and they met again, of course, and they got married. But then my granddad died in 1940, so he wasn't here all that long. And my grandmother, shortly after that, sold the hotel. At that time it was a Northern Hotel, and moved back to Clarkston. And then later on she moved back here and she died here. And they're both buried up at the cemetery.
Yeah.
And of course my folks are.
Okay.
Now I'm getting into more detail, and I think you wanted at this point in time.
That's fine. We'll get to it sooner or later.
Yeah.
Well, Dorothy, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm a native of Long Valley. I was born in Long Valley and went to school there in Donley 2 years, high school, and then my dad sold a place there and moved here. Now, he and his parents came to Long Valley in 1917, and he graduated from Roseberry High School and farmed a potato ranch and pea ranch that I grew up on. And so then he sold that. He got awful tired of row crops and so forth, so he had a chance to come and buy the cattle ranch here. And he bought it from Bailey Armacost, and Bailey Armacost had bought that ranch from Campbell's, and so that was in 41, and the folks lived here then until, I suppose 70.
Okay,
And-
what were your parents' names?
Wayne and Elsie Whitney. Inez knew them real well. It was Old Meadows. And I have a brother, George, who was here since he was 10, so he's more of a native of Meadows than I am. And he graduated with John Fields, and he could tell a lot more than I can. I don't know too much. I was here 1 year and graduated from high school here. It was during wartime, and so I took my junior and senior year together and graduated. There were 5 girls in my class because it was wartime, the boys were gone, and Earl Miller and Morris
Craigbaum?
No, it wasn't Craigbaum, it was Loomis.
Oh,
Those 2 went to college, went to Moscow, so they could get a year of college along with their senior year of high school. So there would have been 7 of us, but as it was, there were 5 of us girls. And the other girls needed a certain class or 2. And so they let me take it with them to fulfill my requirements so that one wasn't just in the class alone.
Yeah.
So we came at 8 in the morning and had, extra classes. And I used to ride to school with Craigbaum. What was his name? The dad that worked for the county here?
Edlow.
Yes. Norma was in school too, so she and I, of course, rode with her dad then because we lived real close to Craigbaum's in Old Meadows.
What year was that you graduated?
45.
45.
So then I left and got married in July of 45 and have lived back in Long Valley ever since. So really I'm not a native of Meadows and not...
Now, was the Whitney place, was that south of Old Meadows out there in that one?
by Rainey Place, south of Rainey's place.
Okay. And that's all subdivided now?
Yes, my brother sold it a few years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Inez, you look like you want to say
Well,
something.
I guess I'm an old timer from Meadows. There used to be a little friction when New Meadows decided to build a town down here. People started to call that Old Meadows. And all the old timers said there isn't such a thing, that's Meadows, Idaho. We were there first. I can remember when Smiley was the governor of Idaho, right above our ranch. On the highway, they put a sign up, Old Meadows. And for those that were related to Howard Dryden and knew him, he and my husband didn't approve of that, so Howard Dryden phoned the governor and said, come up and get the sign down or I'll tear it down. A couple of days, the sign was put up, Meadows, Idaho. So when I read about Old Meadows, I still feel, where's Old Meadows? It's Meadows. I think I'm the last one that's fighting the cause.
Now, where did your family live? Where did your parents live when they first came?
My parents came from Montana, but my husband's parents came from Scotland and moved here and homesteaded in 1880. And they lived on Cemetery Road. I think you had a meeting of the Wilsons. I had written an article about them, but I didn't come that night. But John Wilson and Wills Williamson, one of the first old timers in the Valley, a bachelor, he and Mr. Wilson spent the winter in Packer John's cabin in the winter of 1775, trapping beaver. Oh, wait,
18.
not 1775. 1875. Trapping beaver.
Wow.
And trapping salmon, which salmon, at one time, this valley was called Salmon Meadows, when the salmon would come up. So the old timers tell me, and I've seen it several times listed as Salmon Meadows.
Do you
Until they built the road down towards north and put that falls in, whatever caused, then stopped the migration of the salmon, they said.
Last time we had a session here, we were speculating, or somebody said that when they put the road in, something to do with the road construction created that falls. Do you know any more about that?
They tell me in Kenneth that that's what happened. With that falls that stopped the salmon.
And what is that cement work that's still there? You can see here and there. Was that an attempt at a fish ladder, or do you know anything about that? Okay. I was going to ask you, where did your parents live and where did you grow up in the valley?
I grew up in Montana. My mother's family came from Quebec, Canada.
Right, okay.
And my grandfather came from Ireland.
So you came here in 1936.
as a bride to George Wilson.
Uh-huh.
And I lived on the ranch until my daughter lived there, Tana Kirby, so she's on the ranch.
And where is that place at?
It's on the way to Meadows on the right side of the road. There's a big barn with white gable ends, and it's red. Not a barn red, but a maroon red.
Okay. So, I was going to ask you too about the beaver trapping. Did you ever hear any stories about how many beaver were here in the valley and whether they had a lot of luck catching beaver?
No, I never did hear them say that. I think in those days, from talking to the old timers, a lot of things they didn't put a lot of credit on. They were busy making a living, and they didn't pay attention to a lot of things or keeping record of things.
Yeah.
It just, it was so different. When I talked to the old timers about, you asked them something, they'd say, well, so-and-so was born the year of the big snow or something, but they wouldn't quite tell you the date. It was just a fact, things happened, and they went on about their business. It was mostly making a living.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't, statistics and that didn't mean anything to them.
So tell me a little bit about your early married life and what was going on in the valley then and
Well,
what things were like.
When I came from Montana, we didn't have anything more than we had there. But I remember the old house we lived in, it's been moved to town. And in those days when they built a house, my husband was a carpenter, and they didn't lay the floor down and then build up from it, stop the air up. They'd put the floor down and the 2x4s or 2x6s would come from the outside. And I remember one day I was entertaining the ladies' Goodwill Circle. I had a pet pig, and it chased a cat. The cat ran up the wall between that, and the women got scared and wondered what was happening, but it wasn't built for warmth. Do you remember that, Kenneth, how they didn't put the in the inside on the floor?
Right.
But things, neighbors meant so much to you, and you didn't get to see them maybe for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. They used to have dances at different homes. They would call them kitchen sweats. And they'd get together or go to a dance. And a picnic was a big thing. And Packer John was noted for that. People going in to have their picnics in Packer John's. That was the place to go. Or down to the hot springs where you could swim and have your picnics. But we didn't have time to socialize much. We stayed home.
What kind of music did you have at the dances? Was it live music with people playing?
Probably a fiddle and generally a piano.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe a banjo. I don't know of anybody having a guitar.
Yeah.
But they had what they called a fiddle.
Was there anybody in the area that was known as a fiddler or a musician for dances that you remember?
Not really.
Yeah. Okay.
Just whoever they could get. So.
Yeah.
But that was our outings. And with the women, they'd get together in a group and make quilts for the needy. The Goodwill Circle was organized.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, I don't know, I would look forward to a dance for maybe months at a time to go to a dance because we didn't get to town. We had no beaten up car. Many a times I rode a horseback to town to buy my groceries. And once I tried to bring some eggs home, and that didn't work, so. But it was a joyful time, and a good time. And when I look at the world now, I think they were probably the happiest times people could have had.
Yeah. Well, you started out in your married life then during the Depression, right? What year were you married?
In 36.
36, so I was right
I
in
was
the middle.
in high school during the Depression.
Uh-huh.
And I remember especially, I had a pair of shoes, and it had a hole in the sole. And it was my wish, and I kept saying, someday I'm going to have a pair of shoes, and it's not going to have a hole in the sole, and I'm going downtown, that'd be Winifred, Montana. I'm going to sit on the curb and put my feet up on an apple box so everybody can see the sole of my shoes. And to this day, when I go in a store, I go to the shoe department. But we didn't mind doing without. Everybody else went without. In Montana, I remember during the Depression, they sent in a carload of beans in 50-pound sacks. Everybody got a sack of beans. And my mother seemed to know how to cook beans, but so many women didn't. And they were always coming to the house. You know, she cooked and baked beans. So, but we all shared alike.
Well, Glen, you were born in 1929, did you say?
29, yes.
So the Depression, do you have many memories of that? You would have been a kid, of course, but...
I have my memories of, you probably shouldn't hear them, but I would put this spoon under that little spigot. Good stuff. It's I had dough all the way around it.
Little spigot?
It was liquor.
Yeah, in the stores or the...
No, it was at home, and we were way out there. And
That's some of those Bill made.
check it out.
Was it homemade stuff?
Yeah.
Was it some of the Riggs Brothers liquor?
No, they might have been making it too, but Dad had it going, and he made beer.
Yeah.
Did it taste good to you as a kid?
Yeah, he said, "Oh, you've had enough. I'd take 4 or 5 teaspoons." I said, "That's plenty." Well, I was just as happy as before. You kids are just happy anyway. So, I didn't know I was with the real McCoy there.
That's surprising you would like the taste of.
But you know, the beer, we were living down on Hutherland Place then, and we'd have to hide it because you could see for a mile if anyone was coming. This is all against the law. And so back of the old Oregon it would go. But you know, as we were sitting there at the table and being nice, bang, the lid would fly off. I don't know. Just wasn't the right people that showed up, that's all. We'd have been caught. I didn't know he was doing wrong.
Did your dad do that for years, make
Yeah.
his own beer and stuff? Huh.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Did he ever have any run-ins with the law? In reading the papers from those days, every few weeks there'd be an arrest somewhere in Adams County for somebody
I know what?
making booze illegally.
Because Jim Mitchell out here used to make it. And someone else right there on the place joining us, and they'd go down by the creek and in the brush, and you couldn't find it.
Yeah.
They played it smart,
Yeah.
but they never did got caught either. So
In your place, what did you say, out south of town?
yeah, it's about 5 miles, 4.5, like 5 miles. Last one out.
What other memories would you have of the Depression? Anything unique to Meadows Valley that you could remember that during the Depression that was different than other places? Or did people even really...
We didn't realize it, you know, really serious. They were kids to start with, and we always had shoes, we always had clothes, and never even knew what was going on, you know what I mean? But maybe that's ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. Well, I know some people in the general area were already having a hard time making it anyway, and there wasn't a big change.
Yeah,
So,
I know I heard a little group talking, and they said, we're going over to fish over at Lost Lake, right where the water comes out of the lake, because there's lots of it. And the game warden said, you do, and you're going to jail. So they did, and they went to jail. Well, now they were feeding their families.
yeah.
I could even name names, but they're dead too.
Yeah.
So, but
Ken, what about you during the Depression? What are your memories of Meadows during that time?
We had plenty to eat and had a roof over our head, but we didn't have any money. Money was very scarce. In fact, my granddad Reed, the only bicycle I ever had growing up, he took in for a tank of gas, a traveler coming through, about 36, I would say. And I was too small to reach the pedals. It was a full-size bicycle. So he got some blocks of wood and bolted them together on the pedals, and then I could reach the pedals. And old Stanley Parrott was the one that kind of taught me how to ride that bicycle.
Yeah.
But no, people didn't have any money for anything, but we either grew our own food or bartered for it, and I don't ever remember going hungry.
Your dad ran a service station?
Yes, my granddad Reed had the service station on the northwest corner of the junction where the food shop is now. And that was built by Chester Irwin, I think, in about 1925. Then my granddad, when he came in, he eventually went to work in that station for Chester, and then later on bought the station, I don't know what year. So when I remember Granddad would give me my haircuts. I'd go over to the service station and he would set me up on the box and give me a haircut. And he cut my hair until he died in 1940. And then in 40, they bought the hotel, what was then the Northern Hotel, the Heartland. And
Now, which building or where was that?
that's the Heartland Hotel. That's a big brick hotel on
The old Hi-Ho House?
Yes, the old Idaho house. And they were just getting a good start on things. They had the service station, they had the hotel, and things were starting to click for them, and then Granddad died of cancer that year. So my dad took over the service station, and that's where he started in the service station. Well, not true. He started across the street when he was in high school at old Hitz service station, which was the one just to the east of the Pine Knot. And so he worked in there for a while during high school. But when Granddad died, Dad took over his station, and Grandma kept the hotel for a couple of years or so, and then sold it. Let's see, I wrote down, Keith told me who he thought bought that. A guy by the name of Rockwell, he said. Do you remember Rockwell?
Don't remember.
I don't either. But Keith said that he and Forrest Moore used to get in trouble with Rockwell. Do you remember Rockwell?
I don't remember the name. I don't
I don't
remember.
either.
Everybody remembers.
But Keith said he thinks Rockwell bought the hotel from my grandmother. Then my grandmother moved back to Clarkston, Washington.
And that was called the Northern Hotel?
It was the Northern Hotel when
Did they
Grandma
keep
had
the
it.
name?
Well, no, it changed 2 or 3 times. It was the best hotel for a while.
Yeah.
And then, was it anything else that you know of? Anybody here know of another name?
I can't remember.
Heartland Inn, was it?
Was it
Yeah,
a
that's-
hotel as far back as any of you remember? Inez, do you remember?
I can't remember any farther back than that.
Yeah.
And as early as you all remember, was it the Northern Hotel? Is that the earliest name that you remember?
That's the nearest I remember.
Okay. Well, how about you, Dorothy? You have any depression memories, whether they're related to the area or not?
Well, I know at Lake Fork we always had bees, and so they always got a 5-gallon can of honey, and so that's what Mother sweetened everything with. I mean, she baked with it and made all kinds of things out of honey, and we'd use that 5-gallon can in a year. And I remember them getting 50 pounds of beans and things that everybody used to do, you know, a few bushel of apples, and of course I was raised on a potato ranch. We always had potatoes. And over here, well, it was kind of the end of Depression in 45, and it was more wartime things because there were no boys in school. We couldn't go to we couldn't have dances. We couldn't have any kind of parties, you know, because it was wartime and gas rationing and the whole bit. So we just didn't have parties, right, Lorraine?
I was just thinking we girls would dance together in those days. It didn't look bad.
Lorraine and I used to go with, who did we go with? To Job's Daughters. Went up the hill, Job's Daughters, and I always remember Tommy, she was our teacher, Tommy Thomas.
Yeah, Mrs. Thomas.
And so then we went up the hill and it was slick and she went off the road and we had our formals on and I knew how to put chains on. So I selected to put chains on in my formal. Well, I took my formal off and put a coat over my slip and put chains on. And so then we got on up there. Then I had to go to the bathroom and sort of clean up and get ready so I could go into Job's Daughters. And that was about the only outing we had. We didn't have any place to go or nothing to do, or it was just go to school and go home, and that was it. I mean, you know, of course, we had coffee rationing, we had shoe rationing, we had every kind of rationing, and we'd have to save up our coupons and be able to get a little bit. But I always remember the sugar didn't bother because Mother made do with honey in things.
Ken, didn't you have some stories about rationing and tire rationing, rubber rationing, stuff like that in relation to the service station? Seems like that would have been kind of a...
Yeah, gasoline, and especially gasoline.
So was that kind of a hard time for your dad to...
Well, yes, it was, because there's not many people driving around in those days during the war.
Did he do...
Tires were rationed, yeah.
Did he do repair work as
Well, he had a mechanic there, Golden. Bill Golden was the mechanic. Dad just kind of leased the space for Bill to work in. And Harold was our age. In fact, he was in my class in high school, his son. So Bill did most of the mechanic work, and of course we did the servicing part, changing tires and oil and greasing and that sort of thing. But gasoline was a problem. In fact, we used to mix kerosene with gasoline in our cars, which wasn't the best thing to do. Valves didn't last very long in that situation.
Did that smoke pretty bad?
Yes. But, and of course sugar, that was one of the big rations.
Whiskey was
What's that?
rationed. Alcohol was rationed.
Well, I don't remember that.
Okay, Lorraine.
I didn't have any alcohol stamps in there. But you're right, they did. Yeah. And there was a lot of people during the Depression that would come through and stop and want to work for gas. They'd want to do a grease job on the car or something like that, and we'd let them do it once in a while for a tank of gas. Or maybe even $1.50 to go with Pine Knot and get a meal, or something like that.
Dorothy, I was going to ask you about the pea. Did your parents raise peas for quite a while, or was that something that came in when the company came in and started growing, everybody growing peas in the warehouse and all that? Right.
Richard and Samuel and Denny Hogue used to come in and raise peas, and they had a pea packing shed in McCall. They had a pea packing shed in Donley. And we'd pick the green peas. I helped pick peas, and then we'd take them to these sheds, and they would freeze ice in the winter. McCall got to freeze it on the lake, but we had to have a pond in Donley, and then they'd cut the ice and store it, of course, in the sawdust, and then they would cut it and they'd chip it. And then we'd take the peas in. There's lots of doors. We have the warehouse. We've had it 50 years now, and that's Long Valley Farm Service.
Oh.
And so we'd bring them in on the one door, and then they'd put them on conveyor belts, and I also did that too. Sorted out the flats and the speckled pods or anything that didn't look just right, and then they just put those right on a conveyor right onto the railroad cars. Then they'd chip this ice and mix the ice in to keep them, so they'd keep. And they'd ship them to Chicago, New York. They shipped them all over the United States.
They ship them in the pod, right?
In the carload, yes.
But in the pod, they didn't take them out.
In the pod, no, they'd ship them in the pod. And that was before the days of quick freeze plants. So then they could I mean, the only way people got fresh peas, of course, was to get those fresh peas from the different stores that they'd take them to. And it lasted maybe 10 years. And then they had a weevil in the lower country that we didn't have up here. So we could raise the peas it was before the days of chemicals too. So we could raise the peas and they'd be good and wouldn't have the weevil in. And so for a while they really went great guns. They also raised carrots and they turned out real good because the cooler climate's so much better for carrots. They turn out a lot better quality. So anyway, then about 10 years, then that ceased up there, and I remember Daddy turned to Alsike seed and still raised potatoes. He and my granddad brought the first potatoes in the Long Valley that were ever brought in, bought 20 sacks from Colorado and started raising seed.
When was that? Do you remember about?
About 20.
1920?
And they started raising seed because it's so much better in the higher climate because they don't get as big, so it makes better seed. So then they would sell it down the lower country, and then they'd raise their potatoes, which of course turn out bigger. And I remember J.R. Simplot got some of Daddy's potatoes when he was working in Hayburn. When he just started farming in Hayburn, he had a pig ranch and a potato farm. And I remember one year, the first ones he got, then he said, "Well, Wayne, I just need a little credit, so if you'd let me go till fall, then I'll pay you."
This was Simplot.
J.R. Simplot. And so he did, and of course he paid, you know. But he always knew my dad. If he ever saw him at any place, why, he always knew my dad.
Yeah.
What was the Irish potato?
We raised netted gems mostly.
Netted gem.
That's what they wanted then for seed.
I see.
We raised some red potatoes too, but mostly the gems. And then we raised some cobblers, and I guess those were the two main ones. The cobblers are the round ones.
Oh. I don't know that.
Well, for a while they liked, what did they like those for? I don't know. They hadn't started the French fries yet. I don't remember why. Anyway, mostly the gems though.
What happened to raising peas? Why did they stop raising?
Because they got the chemicals, they could treat it down below, and they didn't have the boll weevil. And also the quick freeze plants started sprouting up in the lower valley. So then they could just take them right there and quick freeze them, and a better market.
What about carrots? Did they continue growing carrots?
No,
up
they
there?
kind of quit that too, and I never knew why. But those two people kind of pulled out of Long Valley.
So the people that were doing the peas, were they kind of behind the carrots too? Or?
Yes. Richard and Samuel, I guess. I don't know if I said their name or not.
Yeah.
Those
and they owned the packing shed there that you had down.
And then they had a market to sell things, so they...
I was going to ask you, where was the packing shed in McCall?
Well, it was a little bit towards where the mill was. Just
Along the
kind of on the
railroad,
lake. Yeah. Well, now...
By the tracks, I suppose, pretty close.
Well, it would have been. I guess maybe I can't remember.
Up
I know it was in
up past
McCall.
the depot somewhere, do you think?
Gee, I can't remember. I thought it was close to the lake, but it would have had to been on the railroad track. Maybe somebody else remembers. I sure...
That's not too far from the lake.
Yeah, well, the
Where the
railroad.
depot was, that wasn't really very far.
And they had a turnaround up there, which went sort of like where the big gas tanks were that are gone now too, I think. I don't remember that.
Condominiums all up in there.
Yes, where they are. I just particularly remember Donnelly because we bought the warehouse and started a farm store, and of course I'm familiar with it.
Well, that's the first I'd heard of the packing shed in McCall, so that's why I asked. I didn't know they had one there.
Richard and Samuels had that one.
Now, was there a packing shed here in New Meadows, or wasn't there? Right.
Did they raise peas
And we
here?
had raised
Yeah.
peas on the
Yeah,
South Hill over there.
Oh, did they?
And they had a big pond. It would freeze in the winter, and I'd come down with kids skating in the winter time. I remember I was working for Jim Sullivan in the store, and a lot of the pea pickers were from Oklahoma and back there. And I waited on this lady and laid her produce out for her to take. We didn't use sacks then. And being from Montana, I didn't quite understand her, and she said, "Would you give me a poke?" And I looked at Mr. Sullivan, and I thought, well, gee, I can't hit that woman. So he said, "Get a sack." She wants a sack. But when she asked for a poke, I guess he's afraid that I would retaliate, and for a minute I thought of it.
Well, would people usually bring their own sack
Yes,
for
well,
groceries?
I don't remember. Sometimes they have like a salt sack and a sugar sack to put the groceries in. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
I don't remember any paper sack. I know when I'd come to town horseback, I'd always have a sack.
Now, what store was this?
Jim Sullivan.
Yeah.
He had a store up here where I guess it's between the store now and the loading chute, or what I want to call a loading chute.
Yeah,
Mr. Irvin had the garage, then there was Sullivan's store.
yeah, that's true.
There's only two stores, his and Blake Hancock on the other corner.
Right.
How long did you work there?
Just one summer helping out. But I remember them coming in with their, looking for their pokes, and they would have old-time poke hats on, and very amusing people, really. You know, I'd never seen anything like that before. But
What kind of transportation did they have? I suppose they had their own cars or something.
I don't remember how they got
You
there.
guys remember?
I know one guy, how he traveled. That was my uncle. He lived at Parma, and he grabbed a freight, and he got to Weezer, he grabbed the train and come up here.
Yeah.
And then Dad
Yeah,
had a
and
shack
Lucy.
down here, yeah. And he'd stay in Dad's little shack also. Worked right here. This was peas for 3 blocks, you know. The ice pond and then the ice house. And then your peas themselves, and then they would ship them out right here, you know, onto the track. Packing them here.
Those
But
ones.
he'd be up here every year, and he was the boss.
Yeah.
He'd just hitchhike his way up.
And where was he from?
Parma.
Parma.
Parma, yeah.
So what, do any of you know about what year it was? I guess we kind of covered this, that they stopped growing peas. I would assume it's about the same time here and in Long
It seemed
Valley.
like it was about 37.
It had to be the late 30s. Late
Yeah,
30s.
that's
Late
37 about right. When did they have the big
That
fight?
sound right to you?
Yeah, by
They
40,
all-
I think they stopped, so I
Oh,
suppose it was
don't
late.
remember.
What year was that? I remember
Well,
Dad
let's
came
see,
home
we
with
still
blood
had it
and
when
all.
I was a
Yeah.
freshman in high school, and that was
Those
Yeah, they
pea
had-
pickers were rough.
Yeah,
40.
they,
40. So they still had it in 40 over there.
Yeah.
I think they stopped here in the 30s, because I can't remember it being carried on after we moved to the north end of town, from the south end of town.
What happened to the packing shed and the ice? Did they still use the ice house, I suppose?
Well,
for
they
other
used the
things?
ice house after that, because they used it around town.
Yeah, for a while.
What about the packing shed? Was it here for a while?
I don't,
I remember that.
that would be this end up here, you know.
Yeah.
I can't recall what happened to it. But Joe Caha went into ice business uptown. Well, he didn't use their pond. He just went down to the creek and ran a little dam across.
Yeah.
And then other years we went out to Tamarack and their pond. Another time to McCall, to the Bay Lake. Because that's where he was getting his ice.
Yeah. Was it all, as far as you guys remember, you saw the blocks, did they do it by hand, or did you
Yep.
have any
Yeah.
kind of mechanism?
Well, they had a saw.
Had what?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
They had a gasoline saw.
Kind of like a drag saw or something like that?
More or less, you kind of push it along. And it had this circle blade.
Did it have a circular?
Yes.
Oh, I see, like that.
Yeah, it wasn't like the old power saw that we cut a tree down with. It was a circle.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of a drag saw, you know, where they had a pitman arm that would run almost like a crosscut.
That's what you saw?
I think that's what I remember is more drag saw kind.
Really?
Oh, is that
Did it
right?
have a
I never
motor?
did see that type. I only seen this one. Joe
Yeah.
Sterling could run it, and he had one hand completely gone.
Yeah.
So,
Boy, a drag saw seemed like it'd be pretty heavy to have out there on the ice unless it was pretty thick, I suppose.
Yeah.
How, do you remember anything about how thick the ice was that they would bring in and store?
it was pretty
Big
thick.
blocks.
It was pretty thick. I don't know just how much, do you?
Seemed like the blocks were about 1.5 feet.
Yeah, it seemed like about 18 inches of
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
like that. And
Well, speaking of ice that thick, do you think the winters are any milder or colder now than they were back in the 30s and 40s? Or do you see much change?
Yeah, it's warmer.
I don't think it's as cold
No.
now. I think the weather's changed. It used to be 36 below, we wouldn't think anything of it.
Yeah. Would it be that cold for weeks at a time, or would that be just a cold spell?
Well, I remember one winter that it never got above freezing for, I think, 52 days. That was one of the coldest spells we ever had.
Yeah.
In 49, I saw it 60 below in Long Valley. And once when I was in high school, it was 60 below. And it's never been that cold since.
That was the year they had to fly hay in Montana and Wyoming.
I think so. And as Inez said, it never got above freezing day or night for all of January. It'd cloud up in the daytime and clear up at night. And it was so cold, it'd be 40 below most of the time over there.
What did people do when it got that cold?
Well,
Did it pretty much shut things down?
We had an old shacky house you could throw a cat through, and we stayed. I had a little child crawling, and we stayed by the stove and just shut everything up except the kitchen and the stove. It was cold.
But the ones that really hurt was Boise. It went down and was freezing their lines. Really? They were begging you, turn on your water, it won't cost you nothing. Just get it running and keep it running.
I'd fix a water bottle and put in the crib before I put the baby in it, you know, and then it'd get kicked out in the night and it would be frozen solid by morning. People talk about the good old days. I like the days now. One other thing I wanted to say, you were talking about poke. I have heard of a poke before. But of course, in the potato business, we always had gunny sacks.
Yeah.
Well, then I married this man from Minnesota, and he calls them gunny bags.
Yeah.
So every different country or place has a different name for it.
I remember your dad's airplane.
Uh-huh.
And when we were in high school, now I didn't remember, Gene Soper was telling me this. We were all, about 4 or 5 of us in high school were taking flying lessons from Jim Larkin. He would come over from Long Valley and give us lessons. And Gene said that it was your dad's plane that we used for the lessons.
Probably. He built the Airstrip out here, or helped build it.
And I didn't know whether Jim flew over in his plane or whether he came over and used another plane, but Gene said it was your dad's plane that we took our lessons in.
For goodness sakes.
A little old Maytag Messerschmitt. Yeah. Veronica.
Yeah, Veronica.
And he took Dad back in the backcountry one time to look something over. And you might remember this, but it was real hot that day and he couldn't pull back out of the canyon. So they flew down the canyon to Riggins and then flew back up the canyon from Riggins to New Meadows and landed.
I don't remember that story.
A little bit of a scary operation, I guess.
I know I still don't like to fly.
Well, it's about time to take a break, so we'll take a short break here. There's refreshments, and we'll come back in 10 minutes or so.
We'll take a break and then the
Lorraine knows
elderly.
more than I do about the ballet.
There you go.
Has she been on yet?
We should get her up.
The reason he wrecked that plane was he had too much weight on it and couldn't get up.
She went to Meadows, and then her mother moved to Long Valley. She had to graduate from there, and I was there and had to graduate.
Before before the break, Dorothy, you mentioned that your dad put in the airstrip out here, is that right? Do you remember about when that was and what the circumstances were? Or?
Well, it had to be about 45. And he had gotten an airplane, and of course he left it in McCall. And I don't know if someone else was in with him, or if I think he just took his bulldozer up here and his cat and bulldozer and just made it. Do you remember anymore?
I don't remember, other than Dad would take the oil down the taxiways and stuff, so that it wouldn't stir up too much dust. We used used oil and just poured it out on the ground, which is good stuff. You know?
Do you remember anything about who owned the land, or what's the
Well,
situation
wasn't
now?
Soton that owned the land? Jack Soton at that time? Do you
I don't
know
know.
that?
It could have been, but it isn't anymore. You
Who
see our,
was that?
it's out of Boise that owns it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Soton had his slaughterhouse on the
Yeah.
other side of the hill.
Yeah, I think so.
On the house.
I think he owned that hill.
Who, Jack
You
Soden?
know.
Jack Soton?
Jack Soden had the slaughterhouse.
Yeah, well, did he have the land this side where the plains land? Yeah.
Why was it that he put in the airstrip? Did he have business down here, or was it?
Well, it's when he farmed here and lived here.
Oh,
He had it in Long Valley, and so then he wanted to have it here closer, and of course they didn't take it back to McCall for winter, but just for summer months.
did he fly? Was there any business involved with it, just for pleasure? Or?
Just for pleasure, and they used to go to Flying Farmers breakfasts. They'd have those once a month all over Chalice or different places, and so they got started going to that.
What's the situation with the airstrip now? I don't even know. Did he still use it much, or?
I don't think it exists anymore, does it?
Yeah, it exists.
Does it?
And the state of Idaho owns it. And somebody wanted to buy it and build houses and then it was a neighbor out here, and he was gonna put them in the airport on the flat ground alongside the highway just north of town. I said, no. So we own it and we're gonna leave it where it is.
Are there any hangars out there?
Nope.
No.
No, he didn't have a hangar.
Never had
They never
hangar.
had a hangar.
Is it just for small planes, I suppose?
Oh,
Yeah.
sure, just little ones. They didn't have to have a long airstrip.
Well, Inez, I was told that I should ask you about your military career, or your military time.
Well, it has quite a story, and I've never divulged much of it, but why I went, why I come home. I don't want to embarrass my daughter. All of my friends know it. But my husband, who's 23 years older than I said to him one day, I would like to start a family. And he said, well, I think I'm told to have children. And I said, well, you should have thought about that when you married a young woman. So things went on, and we were over in Baker, Oregon during the war, just started. And I was walking down the street with a good friend. She said, let's join the Army. I said, okay, let's join. So we went up to Baker, which was Baker then, not Baker City, joined the Army. And I went for a summer, and one day my officer that was over my platoon said, Inez, I had a phone call from your husband, and he's going to sell a ranch. He's going to sell the cattle, sell the ranch, and come back where you're at. I said, well, I'm not going to do that. I said, I want to raise a family. He said, well, he did say in there, tell her to come home and she can have a baby. So I got my release from the Army to come home. In a year and a half, we had our son. Greatest thing that ever happened to us until we had our lovely daughter. So my career was cut short by my family. But I had a great time while I was there. I loved it. I was quite daring in everything I did, and I know once we were in this huge armory, and I think there was 250 girls in our platoon, and the lieutenant Malvern said, you take charge of them. make them march and do this and that. And I thought, sure, I'll try it. So I did. Shouting orders, have about face and march and at ease and that. And I said to her, I like that. And she said, would you be interested in going into training and become somebody higher up in the Army? I said, well, I'll think about it. But then when I got the phone call from my husband, that stopped it. So my Army career was left behind. Yeah. But one thing that did happen, in our company, I was in the motor corps, and I had a good friend from Weehype, and she was in the baker department. But we had a barracks close to a Negro company, and we wanted to beat those girls so badly. It marched the day we had parade day. 2 different days, we were all ready to beat them, but I'll tell you, when that music started, those dark girls got out on that field, and they were a thing of beauty, and they beat everything that was marching. So I enjoyed that, but there's something about that race. When they hear music, they have a rhythm that we'll never have.
I was going to ask you and Dorothy both, since you lived for some time out on that end of the valley, and it's a little higher, was it a little warmer on that end of the valley, that part of the valley?
The coldest part of the valley runs through where the substation runs up with which used to be Abshire's.
Really?
Bull and Abshire would get up in the morning, ask how cold it was, and their place was always 10 degrees colder than up close to the trees. Just to see that stretch through there really cold.
Well, do you remember when you were girls, did your families have a garden? And was it, did you have a garden when you were younger?
Yes, we had a garden.
I worked in it till I vowed I'd never have another.
We had a garden, and we had chickens and raised your own pigs.
And
Butchered them and salted them in can.
Yeah.
So people did that in the hard times too. What little they had, they really didn't see a store only to buy coffee and salt. They needed flour. But we survived well by doing that.
What about apple trees? I heard there was an orchard and that up toward Meadows at one time, Krigbaum's.
You did say Meadows?
I said Meadows, just for you.
Yes, I have apple trees on my place where I am, right in Meadows. So. Away from the frost. I don't know if anyone down in the valleys ever raised apples, not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was a little warmer up, a little higher up in toward Goose Creek.
No, I don't know whether it's that strip coming from the opening of Salmon River coming through or something, but.
And Riggs is raised good. They had a good
right clear through. That was just a cold front. New Meadows was warmer, and then that cold place, and then warmer at Meadows. But we're 10 degrees difference all the time.
Yeah, but the side of New Meadows is colder than the upper toward Meadows, right?
Pardon?
New Meadows is colder in general than Meadows, right?
Well, yes, I think so, yes. Well, they're in
Were you
the
going to say something?
I was just thinking about another memory. She said we always had to can meat because, of course, there wasn't any freeze or refrigerator. And I remember Daddy would go up Upper Payette Lake and seine whitefish. And I don't know when they stopped seining, but right away then. But he could bring home all these whitefish, and we'd clean them and put them in a crock and salt it, and put enough salt brine on to keep those whitefish. Then you'd have to take them out and soak them to get them edible, of course, get rid of that salt. So we either had to put everything in brine, like hams and bacons, I suppose, I don't know. And I remember Mother frying sausage and then canning it. And of course we made our own lard. And
But in the barn, we had a huge oat bin. Not as long as this table, and square and about this deep. And we would put our hams and bacon in that in the winter time, and also squash. And in the early days during Prohibition, Mr. Looney had a ranch out here that became Tom Burton's place. He was also one of the men that started the Idaho First National Bank. Well, there was a man that would come through driving from Canada with bootleg whiskey, and my husband knew him very well, so Mr. Looney to have the bootleggers stop at the ranch and they'd bury a couple of cases of whiskey. My husband didn't drink, but when Mr. Looney come up from Boise, he'd get a couple of bottles and go back to Boise. And I told my daughter about that when we were out there the other day, about that. Used to be Canadian whiskey buried in there, so.
In the oat bin, did you say?
In the oat bin.
Yeah.
The revenuers never thought to look that far, I guess.
Who got there, Neil?
You're out there starting a project now, huh?
Well, Glenn, somebody said that you were talking about the roads around here and what kind of shape they used to be in.
They just absolutely never had any gravel.
Really, just dirt. Yeah.
And we just have those ruts, and if that was too deep, you'd get bigger wheels.
What about the main street through
Oh,
New
I
Meadows?
seen a truck sit there for 3 months right in the main street.
Really?
It sunk. The summer had to go by before they got it out, didn't it?
Huh.
But then finally they did go in there and they dug out probably 6 feet, 5 feet anyway. Took all that dirt out and brought in rock, and it's just solid now as can be. That was a joke.
Right here in New Meadows, is there a lot of gravel under the surface here, like there is in some places in the valley, or?
I don't know. Some of my ground I'll dig down for post hole. I hit gravel. The next one I don't. It's just off and on.
Huh. Yeah, but it's pretty wet right in here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions from the audience about anything we brought up? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to have Glen talk a little bit about when he used to work for Joe Caha. He knows a lot about the middle of town there.
What part do you want to hear about?
The good stuff.
Well, we used to deliver feed and chicken feed and hog feed, whatever, and deliver milk because he had a dairy here and a dairy out there. He'd get his milk, and we'd haul milk to Riggins. He had quite a route, and it kept you busy, and it was just one couldn't do it, but it was kind of fun. You'd get, the ground wasn't drained. See, they put in some more drains lower in the valley, and we quit sinking so bad here. It used to be you couldn't ride a horse out here in the field in the spring, but you can now. So it did some good draining down there. But anyway, we'd get stuck and everything else, just making these deliveries. Lots of fun.
What kind of vehicle did you have?
I had pickups, just Chevrolet pickup.
Yeah. So this was when, like in the 40s, or?
Yeah, it was in the 40s.
Yeah.
And this day, is she here? Yeah. We'd move her, she ran the telephone office. And then she'd have to be moved to McCall, run in a while, and then after a while, she'd be moved back. But we'd get to haul that piano, she had a piano. And this one kid could play "Mama Little Baby Left Shoulder." He'd play that thing all the way up and back. And the cars would follow along real slow. They were listening.
So tell me about Joe Caha. I've heard that name before. Who was he? And you said he was kind of an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
Had several things going, did he? Or?
Yeah, he had feed down at Cow Creek, down below Riggins, and he had Roy Helm and his crew growing it. Well, then we'd take the old ton and a half truck and go get it in the fall, fill that shed where I live now. This old slaughterhouse used to be. And then he had Sim's old service station. You used to put feed in that. And that would be Leroy feed, some fancy chicken feed stuff. The other was oats and wheat. And he had quite a business of feed.
He had a couple dairies too?
Well, he didn't own them, but he was getting the milk.
Yeah.
He had a creamery right on Main Street.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was a cream buying station. We'd work the cream up and then put it in 10-gallon cans, throw it on this train, and then take it to Cambridge. And there was a churn there, you know.
Yeah.
It was a creamery. And it was kind of interesting. I missed the train. He said, well, you'll have to take the 10.5 truck because pickups are so low. Well, I got down there, sure enough. Way up here is where you have to dump that cream.
Now, was it actually a full-time dairy, or was this just local farmers
No.
that had cows? Would
Just local farmers.
Yeah.
Buchholz was one, and Prescott Wilkie was the one out here.
How many cows did they each have? Do you remember?
I haven't had any either.
I don't know. I know Keith worked for Wilkie for a while.
Yeah.
Well, we would sell them cream, but we'd only have one cow.
Yeah.
And I remember Don Wisdom was 12 years old, would drive that little truck of Joe's and go around the valley and down the side road.
Yeah.
And he drove very careful, 12 years old, I
Yeah,
remember.
he was a good little driver.
And we'd bring the cream to town, maybe in little cans. I've got some of them hanging in the barn.
Even the major, what's his name, Smith?
Smith, up the canyon.
Yeah. Well, he had a goat. He'd bring in a little can of goat's
Yeah.
milk, and I thought, what do we do, dump this? No. You tasted it. Yeah, everything had to be tasted, whether it was sweet or sour.
Yeah, I think he bought from Virgil too, didn't he?
Yeah.
Quite a bit from Virgil.
Yeah, anyway, this goat milk was never poured in with the cream. That little can had to go, here's your big 10-gallon cans, well, everybody's cream's been dumped together, but not the goat. It had to
Kept
go
it separate?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I don't know what the difference would have been. We had to keep it separate.
Did everybody, I mean, a lot of people have milk cows, I suppose, just 1 or 2 cows? And
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
anybody have more than just 2 or 3, or?
Oh, we used to milk 6 at our house.
Really?
I think the Clays used to have more milk cows.
Yeah, and Harold Campbell had milk cows till World War II shut him down.
All right.
But that's the only way you got your milk and cream and butter and cheese. You
My
did
dad
that at home.
worked for old Hank Williamson at the
Oh,
Fox
yeah.
Farm for a while. He worked all summer, and that end of the summer, Hank couldn't pay him anything, so he gave him a milk cow. I think I was about 6, something like that, and that cow raised us kids.
Did anybody, you had 6 cows, did you milk them all by hand?
Oh, no, there's a whole bunch of us kids. Yes, all
But you milk them
by
by hand, yeah. Did anybody have a milking machine that you knew of?
hand. We did later.
Yeah?
When we all moved out and Dad was left holding the bag.
They had to,
I have a couple items I'd like to mention about
Okay.
Sim Reed and the service station. He had a park right by the station. If anybody saw the pictures in that book, you see the little station, they had cabins in a U shape back behind, and then he had a park built in there, and he grew a bunch of trees, and the tree that was out in front of Dorsey's house, or still is, what Dorsey's house isn't, but the tree is, the one they decorate for the town tree, was one of those trees from the park, and that they didn't take down when they built Dorsey's place there. And also he had a little rock drinking fountain that he had in that park, and when they built the ball field over here, they moved that little rock drinking fountain over to the ball field. And it stayed there for a long time. I don't know where it is now. You know, Glen? But,
But that was a neat, he had a very neat place.
oh, he did.
His
Yes,
cabins
it
were
was, yeah, it was a nice place.
tell me a little bit about the cabins. Were they, I suppose that was like a precursor to a modern motel, right?
Well, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
It was, they were joined like a motel, except they had garages in between the
yeah.
cabin areas. They'd have a little single-car garage. And people lived there the year round. We had 2 bachelors that lived there, and for a long time.
And you had some families.
Yeah, well, we lived there for a while.
Yeah.
When we sold our place on the south end of town, we lived in a cabin until granddad bought the hotel, and then we moved into the hotel with them. But,
Well, tell us about the cabins. How big were they? How many rooms did they have? An indoor bathroom?
oh, they would have oh no. They had a bunch of outhouses out the back side of the cabin. None of them had indoor plumbing. And
So no water plumbed in or anything?
no, we didn't even have running water. We had spigots around.
Yeah, you had a hydrant out there.
Yeah, had a hydrant out there to get the water. And every year I remember having to calcimine those cabins after we had them. And if you know calcimine, it's just like chalk on the wall.
To clean it and disinfect
And
it?
they were very small. They had a little kitchenette. They had a living room. And I believe that they had a bedroom. I was trying to remember the one that the gunsmith had. Remember him? He was town marshal for a while.
Herman Russell.
Herman Russell, that's the guy. He was shell-shocked during World War II, and his right hand shook like this all the time, and he always carried a .44 hog leg when he was out on his rounds. He asked me one time to go rabbit hunting with him. And I thought, man, that ought to be fun. Couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. So I took my .22 rifle, and he took that old hog leg. He brought rabbits home, and I didn't. When he got that gun in his hand, it was as solid as a rock.
But it was going just like this, believe it or not.
Yeah,
You think he's gonna,
had a lot more respect for him after that.
I'd like to ask Kenny a question. Is he the sheriff that used to ride the bicycle up and down the street, and he had such a long rifle? Some of the businessmen said as he rode down the street, he'd go like that, and he was knocking all the windows out as he went by. Who
Well, I
was
don't
that
remember
sheriff?
that.
Don't you remember that sheriff they had? Oh, I do.
I don't remember that. That might have been Wild Bill Elliott.
Yeah, you'd see him, he would come to town, you'd see him riding down the middle of the street with that long gun across the handlebar.
They had
And I was trying to think of his name, but I couldn't.
a night watchman. His name was Bill Elliott, and we called him Wild Bill Elliott. He always wore 2 pearl-handled pistols. One day, Gary Cooper stopped for gas
Yeah.
and saw Bill. He wrestled him down to the floor and tied him up with a tire chain. Bill was mad.
Wait a minute, who tied who?
Gary Cooper tied Wild Bill.
Oh, okay.
Bill come up and he was madder than heck, and he said, "Who was that character anyway?" Dad said, "Well, that was Gary Cooper. You know, from that day on, he was so proud of that."
And he was a sheriff or a deputy?
Well, he was a night watchman. Yeah,
Oh,
we
night
called
watchman.
him a deputy, but I think he was deputized by the sheriff's department, probably.
But Herman Russell was a deputy or a sheriff of some kind?
Yeah, he was the same thing.
Yeah.
At different time. My granddad was one for a while. My dad was one for a while.
Yeah.
And they had the pea-picking riot while my dad was one. And he shot somebody in the leg and came home with a bloody nose, and that's all I remember about
You
that.
don't know the story behind it?
No, except that the pea pickers and the townspeople got into it over at LaFay's dance hall.
Huh.
It was quite a big riot, I guess.
Sounds like an interesting
I was too
time.
young.
I think Marvin Yoakum is the one that had a cue ball.
Oh,
Remember that?
yeah, I heard that.
Just outside the door, and the pool table's the other end of the pool hall. And he threw that and hit the guy right smack in the back of the head. Should have killed him. But he just went to his knees and got up. Who threw that? And he was halfway home. Because he seen when he just went to his knees, he's going to get up.
That may have been when Dad quit too, I don't know.
That's kind of funny, some of that stuff.
Ken, I was going to ask you a little more about those cabins.
Okay.
What kind of heat did they have in them?
Just had a wood stove.
Yeah. Did the place supply the wood, or people have to get their own wood, or
I don't remember whether we got our own wood or not.
did you have a wood?
I don't remember bringing wood in for them.
Yeah. Were the cook stoves wood stoves?
Yeah,
or-
it was, well, that was the only stove in the place was a wood stove. It was cooking and heating.
Oh, mhm.
And I remember, the only one I remember very well was the one I had my radio station in. Of course, we didn't use any heat. Do you remember using any heat?
No.
I had a radio station in one of the cabins behind the station. And I think I told last time we were together about putting the bed springs on the roof and using them for an antenna. And could cover the valley pretty good.
Huh.
Well, you know, Raymond Clausen would sell that little thing, and it's just a wire. You could plug it to your photograph and get in your car and come clear up here on the dump hill and hear it playing. That's about where it die out.
Yeah, right.
Kind of a neat little thing.
Yeah, Clausen got me started in that.
Earl Miller said, I wondered who was making that music.
Oh, we broadcast the school news and stuff like that. We had a good time till when it was old Roy, one of the renters of the other cabin, Roy, and there was Earl and a Roy. They had rented adjoining cabins. And Roy made a mistake over our microphone one time hollering at Earl. And I heard about that the next day. So I decided I better shut down before somebody got a hold of me.
Was the radio reception, you know, a lot of places got radios in the 20s. Did Meadows Valley have radio reception at that time?
We used to listen to Spokane radio all the time.
Really? Was it just at night, or could you get that during the day? Or?
Well, early in the morning I would get Rocky Star on the radio, and then the Sons of Pioneers right after that. I'd be out milking and listen to the radio. But I remember getting at the hotel, on the radio we had there, I could get Del Rio, Texas, you know, that it was across the border in Mexico, and it was a high-powered station. It was illegal in the United States.
Way more than the United States will let you use yourself.
Yeah.
We hear it just played.
What kind of programming? Mostly music, or?
Most of it was country music.
Yeah.
And,
What do you remember about?
I don't know when we even got electricity.
well, we had battery-operated radios before they put
Well, we didn't
electricity
have.
in.
I remember
Campbell had
kerosene
it,
lamps
yeah.
till I don't know when.
Yeah. Well, you know, they had,
They had lights here and in Meadows, but I don't know about the ranches.
yeah, it was about 46, I think, before Harold Camel got electricity.
Could be.
And we used battery-operated radios there. I can't remember not having electricity, but what's the name up there, McCullough?
Yeah,
McCullough? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
like,
a generator up there?
Yeah.
Fall, coming out of the creek, and fall generated.
Had a water wheel.
Yeah, and water.
I remember we had an ice box. We'd come to Joe Caha's about every 3 days to get a chunk of ice.
Yeah. Harold had a kerosene burning
We had kerosene lamps and
refrigerator.
lanterns.
He had a refrigerator burned on kerosene.
Yeah. I used to have the list of everybody's box, the size. Yeah. Then the ice day come and saw these pieces fit all the ice boxes that they got.
So you had to make sure they were the right size to fit them?
Yeah, some bigger, some smaller, some up and down. They were quite different.
Huh.
And that one picture of the old service station in the junction that Granddad Reed had, you'll see there's only one gas pump, and it's a hand-operated gas pump.
I remember that.
And he had a pot-bellied stove for heat, and he and his friends would sit around and play checkers all day long.
Now, did the station have water plumbed into it?
Later on he did, but he, like I say, the cabins and the station were furnished from hydrants that they put in.
What about air compressors? Did they have those early on, or did they have hand pumps primarily, or how'd they?
I don't remember any hand pumps. I can only remember compressors.
Yeah.
Electric
Were
compressors.
they pretty big things compared to some of them they have now, or?
One Bain had, that's where I work, and you work across the street.
Yeah.
It would just chug away and then keep that pressure right up.
Yeah, ours had a tank on it probably about half as long as this table and about like that.
Same size.
It was 1941 we got electricity, and it was REA, Rural Electrification Association came through
That was in Long
over
Valley.
there. So of course there was some here when we moved here in 44, but
Yeah.
During,
My mother-in-law said they got electricity out there on the ranch in 1939.
39. You know, during the war, we had to shut off lights and all that good stuff. Okay, we had street lights. So over here at Riggs's, out there on a pole, you go out there and turn this little button and that light would go out. And then when you turned it back on, well, our meter would start running again. It was a city light.
Yeah. Was it just one light?
Well, there's different ones around town.
Yeah.
But the one there is because I live right by them. And hey, that meter runs when that light's on, and you
Yeah.
leave it on day and night, except for the nights that you had to, they'd blow the whistle and you'd have to cover your windows and all that stuff.
Do you know when Tommy got electricity? He had Carbide for, I remember as a kid out there on the ranch.
I don't have any idea, really.
Yeah.
I think probably he was one of the last ones for a long time.
Yeah, because I must have been 10 or 11 years old, and I can still remember the old Carbide lights that he had in the house.
We had an old Blackberry Inn, it had Carbide lights. I didn't know that until it was demolished for 30 years.
Now, for Carbide lights, did they have a tank, like a central tank, and then
Yeah.
hoses running to
Yeah,
the
his
individual
tank was
lamps?
buried in the ground, as I recall. Do you remember? It was,
And the lines would go to your lights.
yeah, you had the gas lines that went up to the lights, and the Carbide would generate the gas.
And they would put, like a Carbide was kind of a rock they would put in water, is that right?
Yeah,
And it would
yeah.
generate the gas?
Right.
Yeah.
I can't remember the carbide lights, but I can remember the smell.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only Carbide outfit I saw was Tommy Carr's.
There was one up on the Rats place where we used to live.
Oh, is that right?
We didn't have carbide, but tank and fixtures, they even had carbide lights in the barn.
Yeah.
How bright were they compared to a kerosene lamp?
About 3 times better.
Really?
They run,
They were pretty good lights, as I recall.
yeah, they're round valley way.
You guys had them?
Oh, yeah. And
What did the lamps look like? Did they have reflectors, or were they just like a round?
Well, I'll tell you, you better ask him, because I never did
yeah,
get to
he
see
knows
one
more
work.
about it than any of us.
They had to come out of, they had a pipe.
Yeah.
They run through, and then the ditch stuck up, and that's what.
They had a flint in them.
Like a cigarette lighter?
At our ranch out in Grangeville, there was a flint, and you just twisted that and the light would come on.
So it would be just like a flame coming out of a pipe?
Yeah, just
Well.
like flame.
Did it have a mantle on it or anything?
Oh,
like
no.
that? Just right out in the open?
Oh, yeah.
That sounds safe.
Right in the middle of the room, I see my grandfather, 93 years old, stand under that and read the newspaper.
It was kind of form of gas, you got carbon. It formed the gas, and that's what all of the
How high could you adjust the
Yeah,
flame at the highest? Did it get very
Carbide
tall?
lights.
Just a couple
I can't
inches?
remember them, but I can smell, I can remember the smell.
I don't suppose it would have been a very high pressure type of
Well,
thing?
it was fairly low pressure, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't remember about reflectors either. You're mentioning that. I don't,
They had pretty little light shade bulbs.
well, they probably used it as, were they?
Glass.
Glass, they were glass, weren't they?
It looked just
Yeah.
like several little glass shades on the lamps and stuff,
Yeah.
yeah.
Did a lot of,
Down there. Except in the barn, they had round globes covered with wire.
it protected.
There was even a spigot in the kitchen for a gas iron.
I miss seeing all
Like I
those
said,
work.
it wasn't working or anything when we lived there.
They just had the plumbing and some of this stuff left, huh? That's interesting. Well, I think we're running close to time. Morris, would
I
you?
wonder if you talk about switch from using horses on your farms to going to tractors, and when that happened in your areas.
Well, I'll tell you, in our case, we never did get a tractor. It was always horses. Yeah. So, but Simpson had a tractor, and he'd help us hay, and oh man, just bring that stuff in, throw in a stack in a day where it'd take us a week. It was fast.
Old Harold Camel would never have a horse on, or a tractor on his place. He would, if a horse couldn't do it, he wasn't going to do it. And I worked for him till 46, through 46, I guess. And as far as I know, when he left the place, he still didn't have a tractor at all. Do you know when Tommy got electricity? He had Carbide for, I remember as a kid out there on the ranch.
I don't have any idea, really.
Yeah.
I think probably he was one of the last ones for a long time, I think.
Yeah, because I must have been 10 or 11 years old, and I can still remember the old Carbide lights that he had in the house.
We had an old Blackberry Inn, it had Carbide lights. I didn't know that till it was demolished for 30 years.
Now, for Carbide lights, did they have a tank, like a central tank, and the
Yeah.
hoses running to
Yeah,
the
his
individual
tank was
lamps?
buried in the ground, as I recall. Do you remember? It was,
And the lines would go to your lights.
yeah, you had the gas lines that went up to the lights, and the Carbide would generate the gas.
And they would put, like a Carbide was kind of a rock they would put in water, is that
Yeah,
right? And it would
yeah.
generate the gas?
Right.
Yeah.
I can't remember the carbide lights, but I can remember the smell.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only Carbide outfit I saw was Tommy Carr's.
There was one up on the Rats place where we used to live.
Oh, is that right?
We didn't have carbide, but tank and fixtures, and they even had carbide lights in the barn.
Yeah.
How bright were they compared to a kerosene lamp?
About 3 times better.
Really?
They run,
They were pretty good lights, as I recall.
yeah, they're round valley wide.
You guys had them?
Oh, yeah. And
What did the lamps look like? Did they have reflectors, or were they just like a round?
Well, I'll tell you, you better ask him, because I never did
yeah,
get to see
he knows
those
more
work.
about it than any of us.
They had to come out of, they had a pipe to
Yeah.
run through, and then them little jets stuck up. And that's what,
They had a flint in them.
Like a cigarette lighter?
At our ranch out in Grangefield, there was a flint, and you just twisted that and the light would come on.
So it would be just like a flame coming out of a pipe?
Yeah, just
Well.
like a flame.
Did it have a mantle on it or anything?
Oh, no.
Just right out in the open?
Oh, yeah.
That sounds safe.
Right in the middle of the room, I see my grandfather, 93 years old, stand under that and read the newspaper.
it was kind of formed the gas, you got carbon. It formed the gas, and that's what all of the
How high could you adjust the
Yeah,
flame at the highest? Did it get very
Carbide
tall?
lights.
Just a couple
I can't
inches?
remember them, but I can smell, I can remember the smell.
I don't suppose it would have been a very high pressure type of
Well,
thing?
it's
just
fairly low pressure, I think.
Yeah.
But I don't remember about reflectors either. You're mentioning that. I don't,
They had pretty little light shade bulbs.
well, they probably used it as, were they?
Glass.
Glass, they were glass, weren't they?
It looked just
Yeah.
like several little glass shades on the lamps and stuff out
Yeah. Did a lot of,
out there. Except in the barn, they had round globes covered with wire.
it protected.
There was even a spigot in the kitchen for a gas iron.
I miss seeing all
Like I
those
said,
work.
it wasn't working or anything when we lived out there.
They just had the plumbing and some of this stuff left, huh? That's interesting. Well, I think we're running close to time. Morris, would you?
I wonder if you talk about switch from using horses on your farms to going to tractors, and when that happened in your areas.
Well, I'll tell you, in our case, we never did get a tractor. It was always horses. Yeah. So, but Simpson had a tractor, and he'd help us hay, and oh man, just bring that stuff in and throw in a stack in a day where it'd take us a week. It was fast.
Old Harold Camel would never have a horse on, or a tractor on his place. He would, if a horse couldn't do it, he wasn't going to do it. And I worked for him till 46, through 46, I guess. And as far as I know, when he left the place, he still didn't have a tractor at all.
In Long Valley, go ahead.
No, I was going to say probably the most interesting thing for me is when they had grain, and then we get the thrash machine out and thrash that grain. And your machine that was steam, it'd be way out there in a big long belt coming through, so that you wouldn't want to set that thing on fire. And then everybody out in the field bringing this grain to that machine and throwing it in.
Is that a steam tractor type?
Yeah, it was. And we're trying, Bill Anderson, the last one I seen run was his. And Don Yoakum and I figured it was a great honor we got to work on the last one that was ever run in the valley. Where we lived, there was a thrash machine there, and when we first moved out there, I was too little, but Dad would use it all the time. He'd go wind that old widget up, start pulling the thrasher and doing some work on that end of the valley. But I was too little to go along. I'd like to hear the whistle blow.
Dorothy, what were you going to say?
It was about 36. Daddy got a tractor over there. And so, approximately, I'm not sure.
Steel wheels on it, or?
No, yeah, the first one did have steel wheels. It was a John Deere.
Do any of you know, during that transition period from horses to tractors, did some people have both horses and tractors for a while?
I think so.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah, I think that was pretty common.
Yeah. Must have been an interesting time.
Well, I guess Inez's pictures over there is an old beaver slide. And I was always told that Earl Simpson brought the first one to the valley and built it here. That he lived in Jackson Hole. And anyway, they used beaver slides down there. And anyway, after he built one, everybody saw it. I think everybody in the valley had one. It was quite a interesting.
This beaver slide, that picture was taken on the old Ed Goodman place on Cemetery Road.
Before that, did people use the old A-frame type with a Jackson fork?
Yeah, we used to.
Yeah, we used a Jackson fork all the time.
Others used an overshot.
Yeah. Now, what's the difference between an overshot and a beaver slide? Did they work in a similar way at all?
Well, the beaver slide just kept on a gradual slope, clear up to the top, and then it'd fall
Like the
down.
teeth would just slide up and then go over like
The
this?
hay would slide up and then fall
Then we
down.
built the hay.
And the other was forks. And you'd put that load on there and it would just go up in the air, wham, and it just made your stack. That was the overshot.
Nets were used quite a bit too in the valley
Really?
for stacking.
On like an A-frame type pole derrick or what?
Well, they were pulled out on an A-frame with
Yeah.
the Roman derrick, and the nets were laid flat on the ground, and then you could put a buckload of hay on the net at one time, and pull the buck rake back, and then fasten the nets at the top. And they had poles with a release at the bottom. And then you pull it up with the derrick and put it in, move it to where you want it, and then jerk line, and the nets would come apart and just drop the hay. Of course, you always had to top off with a Jackson fork or something like that. use nets.
I
But
never did see that word.
I was real proud when Harold told me that I could run the buck rig.
Those are fascinating to watch.
So everybody pretty much went to the beaver slide for a while there, you think?
Well, a lot of people did.
Yeah.
First one I ever seen when I moved here.
It was fast. Get ready for the...
Yeah, you'd used a buck at a time on that, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Simpson, he had his tractor there, he'd just keep putting. Some of them be falling in before you ever started to think. Man, he'd pile up quick. But he had a good tractor. The rest of us using horse buck
That
rigs.
lady had something she wanted to say.
And this is really changing the subject, but in medical care, I know that they had doctors that came here, but what about undertakers, or how did you take care of your deceased? Did someone come in, or what was your experience with that?
Nobody was allowed to die, was they?
I mean, they didn't take them to Boise to be involved, or how?
You know how they did it?
Uh-uh.
Blake Hancock did a lot of it. If somebody would die, he would sit there for 3 days and nights, then ready to go be buried, because he never said anything in those 3 days. And I guess that's all they were going by.
I just wondered how they reported the deaths,
Well, I don't know that.
or was there, because now you have to have a death certificate.
How did they take care of the bodies when they died? I said, Blake used to sit with them.
Well, I know they had a county coroner from the beginning of the county, and
He was in council. Yeah.
Herb Fitz was the coroner for a long time.
Yeah, he was, as a matter of fact. I saw that on his picture.
He would be a pharmacist. So
Yeah.
I was just curious about that.
But see, we didn't have any for years. 1940, wasn't it, when we got a drugstore?
Yeah. That was,
And even then, Blake Hancock held it.
yeah. Yeah, Herb was for a while the county coroner.
Yeah.
Tell the story about why he built the drugstore.
Well, I can remember when some of the old timers died.
I don't know that.
The only coroner I remember was Blake Hancock would come and lay the bodies out and dress them in. A couple of days, there was no embalming, and about a couple of days you'd bury the dead.
Yeah. What was you saying, Nita?
Well, you told me one time that, Blake had the whole block there, but the drugstore, somebody wanted the drugstore or had to have a drugstore here or something, so he built the drugstore?
Yeah. Yeah, it's we used to have to buy our books at school. Well, soon they got that drugstore built. Now we go up to the drugstore and buy our books to go to school. And of course, there's a lot of things with the drugstore besides the milkshakes and all that. And it was nice to have it. And of course, doctor would come up, go get a drug. Could do that before I had to go to McCall. Council too far to go.
Yeah.
So it was really a credit when he got that. And I don't know who pressured or talked Blake into doing it, but it was his store. And then what was that first name?
Herb Fitz.
Caha, the first name. And then Herb Fitz.
Yeah,
as a pharmacist? Or?
Yeah, as the pharmacist. And then it just kind of went to petering out. I don't know what the deal was. Maybe the doctors weren't coming up, so they'd come 3 times a week here. But that's when Boy Sped come in. They had an influx, and it was really taking care of, something to come up for. And they'd talk them in to come and see him, the doctor. I guess a lot of people would go see him. And whenever I went there and had to have his prescription, he'd call it across the street. Nah, he said, write it out. So he wrote it out. And then I'd take it over there, and then he'd call him back. He said, I still can't make it out. I still can't make it out.
Who was the doctor?
Edwards.
Oh.
Yeah.
Somebody back,
What was the worst recorded snowstorm or snowfall? Do you remember any particular winter where the snow was so high or that it was the worst you remembered it?
I think maybe that was 1935 or 6, and they had a truck stop here with cars loading on top of it. I think they got 5.5 feet right on top of all those trucks. Just stopped right there between Campbell's and Raster that used to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Davenport's.
always heard the
Dr. Schuyler.
Oh, Schuyler was, yeah, that was years ago. He's the one that, when I was born.
Yeah, the old doctor.
I've always heard the winter of 48, 49 was a big snow winter.
That was a
too.
big one.
Yeah.
I was gone that winter, so.
But it wasn't so bad for us because we had snow cover, and we didn't used to try to keep it off the road.
Yeah.
Let it build up. Boise's the ones that were hurting because they tried to scrape it off or it melt off, and it was going down and freezing their lines terribly. And they were giving them, it'd come out in the paper. We didn't listen to too much radio, but we'd see it in the paper. And beg them to run water, won't cost you a thing. And that was 49, 8,
Yeah, that was a cold year too.
yeah, it was cold here.
I think it
Well,
was.
either 48 or 49, I remember it snowed 2 feet one night.
Yeah.
Pictures of it.
I think it was the winter of 48, 49 that so much snow. There's pictures of it here and there at Tamarack and places, in Pine Ridge, where a lot of
Right
snow.
near town, it was 2 feet that night.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question?
Well, this needed one I'm thinking about, it was in 35 or 6 with those cars loaded on it. But I'm pretty darn young here. Well, it'd have to be back in the year 1935 or 6 when that happened.
Well, we're pretty much out of time.
Okay.
We were talking about tractors and haying, and I wonder if you guys remember the first hay balers around and what they were like.
Yeah. You come up from Indian Valley, and man, could they ever bale hay. It was amazing, I thought.
Did they have to have a guy ride on the baler to
It seemed
trip
like there was
something?
two. One was driving, the other was doing something.
Yeah, and they were wire balers, I suppose. Yeah.
And then later, I think just one person could handle it, right?
I think they had the pole bales first, didn't they?
Could be.
Yeah, they-
About what time period do you remember the first balers coming in here as far as people owning them?
Well, I don't know if anybody owned any up here, do you? I think it was all down below.
Sometime in the mid-40s, wasn't it? 46, 47, that,
I was gonna say the 50s. I
50s.
don't remember anybody out our way anyway having
No.
any balers.
And before that, somebody would just come in, they would hire them to bale the
Well,
hay?
they put up their hay loose.
Yeah. But I mean, when they started baling hay, did they have somebody come in, you say from Indian Valley or somewhere?
Yeah, I had a rubber-tired rig, and you'd just sail right along. They'd pick it up. I don't know if you guys had it done or not, but some of these guys did. We never. Because it was in ours by horse, it was the old hard way.
I was probably gone by the time they got in here at all, much. Seemed to me like I saw a few balers around before I left, but
Well, there was some, I remember some kids from Midvale came up and custom baled people. Here, they've been late for us.
And of course, now it's strictly nothing. We just cattle grazing, that's all.
yeah.
God, the average, we used to count 100 sacks, more than 100 stacks of hay. Now you don't see one because it's all grazed in the summer.
Well, there's a little bit of hay put up here.
Somebody put a little up.
Dean Dryden does, and Brian Stetter still puts up some.
Does he? Good.
The cattle leave the valley.
Yeah. Look at that.
There's a frame of an old baler stationary they run up down here in the hospital.
Oh,
They brought hay in and pushed it in and then hand tied it.
Was there one with a belt?
No, it was, yeah, it was
Run by a belt from a tractor or?
a tractor.
Yeah. Huh. Somebody might ought to save that. That'd be pretty much of a relic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a frame of horse hay.
I wanted to say the first telephones were by Lorraine's uncle, Harry Bean. We had it, he put phones in our country and put phones here, and she should be on sometime and tell about that.
Yeah.
You know, Nita, did you have anything special in mind? You said tell something.
Well, you know, he said Blake Hancock built his house over there.
Yeah.
And he just built the whole block.
Yeah, those next two houses, and then the drugstore, that was all his. Turned the block, and there wasn't any pool hall, or whatever they call it. But how far did he come? Well, down there, Joe Caha, every building that Joe rented was from him. There was 3 of them in there. The one of them was the liquor store, and 2 was Joe's. It was all from Blake. And then Blake owned the store. So he had quite
It was on the corner.
yeah, and he had that old gym out behind. He used to play in that a little bit.
Wasn't that where he kept the coffins or something too, or some
Probably,
warehouse there?
yeah.
Well,
He had.
yeah.
Got to keep him somewhere.
Okay, well, it's past 9 o'clock. Any more questions?
I'm glad you came, see how informative you were.
All a bunch of BS.
Part of it's true, too, you know.
Yeah.
I think you boys could write a lot of things that he'd want to publish.
I want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and we also have some guests tonight from Arizona, so it's very nice to have you here with us. And then our speaker and also some of his family came down from Post Falls, so we certainly appreciate that. Nita has past DVDs and VCRs, and they're $16 a piece, and so you can see her if you want to own any of those in your collection, and also if you'd like to get your name on the list in order to receive tonight's presentation when it comes out, then be sure and talk to Nita. And in the meantime, we want to certainly thank all of our panelists and Dale for another great evening.
This is the only time you've been here.
It's an old name there, isn't it?
Yeah, fairly old.
Me too.
I stopped and visited with your son for a little bit there at the store last summer.
Somebody else.
I was writing a